Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. Just a quick little video to share some of my thoughts I've been having lately about all these coronavirus issues, what's happening around us in this country, in the UK, as well as around the world. First of all, it's been over a week now since all the masajid, etc., have closed around the world. And with all due respect, many ulama, reputable, respectable ulama in England, especially, whom I know personally, many are my seniors, shuyukh, etc., as well, who have given the fatwa about closing the masjids down for Jum'ah, etc. With all due respect to them, they did say initially, until the government passes the law for all the masajid, etc., to close, they will keep the masjid open, and when it does pass the law, then the masjid will be closed, because you have to abide by the law of the land, and it's just beyond our powers, especially small minorities living in non-Muslim majority countries. We don't really have much say, much power, choice whatsoever. But then, obviously, before the law was passed, the fatwa went round about closing the masjid. So, of course, with all due respect to all the shuyukh who have given the fatwa, but me personally, still not convinced, and I don't think still the masajid, etc., should have been closed. And of course, they gave the fatwa. There was, of course, a lot of pressure from the media, from the local politicians, the Muslim professionals, doctors, experts, etc. So there was a lot of pressure. Sooner or later, of course, after a week or so, it would get closed anyway. So why bother come under the radar? Scrutiny, criticism, and attacks from the media, from the government, etc. So there's lots of issues, etc., as well. So Allahu Alam. So I respect the choice, and whatever masjid make that choice, I hope and I pray that Allah rewards them for their good intentions, and I'm quite confident all those ulama, etc., who have given that fatwa, they did it out of good intention. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward them. So I have no doubt about that. But me personally, I still can't get over the fact that the masajid are closed, and Allahu alam how long it will stay closed for. People are just getting used to it, etc. And yeah, I really, really hope Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mercy upon us, and opens the masajid, etc., around the world. And it's difficult to accept this and comprehend this, because really throughout history, these kind of plagues and viruses have spread throughout the world, throughout the Muslim world, and thousands of people have died right from the time of the Sahaba, the Tabi'een, Salaf al-Salihin, etc. And yet there's no record in history where the masajid have deliberately been closed to prevent the virus from spreading, etc. And I'm really surprised, how people are twisting and turning the ahadith and these historical events to justify closing of the masjid. The fuqaha, the ulama, etc., who have given the fatwa of closing the masjid, obviously I have not seen them twisting and turning any evidences and using these kind of historical events to prove their point. So all due respect to that, but there are lots of others who are twisting and manipulating these events, where like there's one where it says the Sahaba, etc. They spread out in the valleys, etc., to try and prevent the virus. And then um, the translator adds in something like the masjids were being closed, where in the actual text there's nothing like that mentioned. Another brother circulating this message, where saying, look, masjids were closed, something along those lines, where the actual text, it says that there were no one alive in some villages to pray in the masjid. It doesn't say anything about they closed the masajid down, and it clearly says that it was an airborne a virus, and almost in some villages every single day 1,000 people were dying, and some villages almost everybody perished and died. There was, to such an extent, there was no one alive to pray in those masjids. That's what the text says, and they use it to prove that masjids have been closed. And during the time of the Sahaba, etc., many have died yet. There's no report whatsoever of closing the masajid down. I mean, the many countries, Syria, Afghanistan, etc., have gone through so many wars and bombs and missiles being dropped on top of them. Yet, no one's ever thought about closing the masajid down or stopping them from going to the masjid. Syria was going on. Has the masjid ever been closed? And I'm sure there's no greater risk of dying than being in the battlefield in a war-torn country. Yet they never thought about closing the masajid down. So it's hard to digest, really. I mean, what a world we're living in, what a time we're living in, what has become the state of our iman and our connection with the masajid, etc. So much virtue, and it's so common. They say the Sahaba and the pious predecessors, their hearts were attached to the masjid. And they use this very famous, popular example. That the example of a believer is and his connection to the masjid is like a fish connected to the water. How a fish, when it comes out of the water, it's struggling, it's panicking, it wants to go back into the water, or else it will die. A true believer, this is how he should feel when he comes out of the masjid. Yet masajid have been indefinitely closed, yet we're all getting on with our lives, busy with our livelihood, and trying to take advantage of the situation. And we're not regretting enough, we're not sad enough about the masajid, etc., being closed, and we're not distressed about what's going to be the state of the ummah, how further are we going to go away from deen, etc. And it sort of worries me, and it makes me think, like, over this virus, where the death rate is very minimal, less than 0.5% are dying from this virus. Yet we are closing the masajid down, etc., throughout the world, on the basis that saving our lives is compulsory. Saving lives come first. I mean, in this country, fair enough, Muslims are a small minority, etc. There's nothing we can do, we just have to go with the flow, sort of thing. But in Muslim majority countries, that is what is so disturbing. The state of the ummah, the governments are not taking any consideration of the Muslim mass. What their choice is, the majority of the nation Islamically, whether they support this view of shutting the masajid down. Likewise, because of the economical situation, because of the financial situation, the day-to-day needs, whether they will be able to, fulfill their basic needs, daily needs, or not. The government's not taking anything into consideration, and just shutting the masajid down, not caring about the sentiment and the feelings and the choices of the Muslim majority, etc. Even before consulting the majority ulama, the senior ulama of their country, etc., the government had already made decisions about closing the masajid down, and that's it. All the scholars and other Muslim leaders, influential figures, they're just staying quiet, because we know how it is in these many of these Muslim countries like Saudi Arabia, etc. They're just gonna get hunted down, murdered, or taken into prison, etc. So they're all afraid of the oppression, injustice of the governments, and staying quiet. And obviously in the Western countries, a lot of the governments as not so bad, much better in that sense. There's not fear of being kidnapped and being killed, etc. But in the Western countries, there's a fear of being haunted and tortured and attacked by the media, to such an extent where you have the royal family, prince and the princess, couldn't even bear the torture and the punishment of the media. So as minority Muslims like us, how on earth are we going to survive and bear the harassment of the media? So in these Western countries, our Muslim leaders, etc., they're scared of the media as much as the Muslim leaders are scared of the Muslim rulers in the Muslim countries. So so especially in the Muslim countries, it really worries me, and makes me be very concerned and disturbed that how the Muslim Ummah can just not even the Muslim Ummah really, because I think majority of the Muslim Ummah, they would prefer to keep the masajid open, and they will just get on with their lives, trusting in Allah, believing that life and death, everything's in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, etc. But the Muslim leaders and the elite and the upper class, they've made their decision to close the masajid, everything down, on the basis that saving lives is compulsory. And I sometimes think, like, if this is the case right now, imagine tomorrow if Dajjal comes out and the fitna of Dajjal spreads. Similarly, he will cause poverty, etc. Those who follow him, he will give them wealth, prosperity. Those who will not accept him, they will live in misery, in poverty, in hardship, and all sorts of other things. And of course, their life is in huge threat. So can you imagine if for this reason Muslims can close the masajid, everything down, because there's less than 0.5% of dying or even actually having any serious symptoms, etc. Everybody's closing the masajid down and justifying it. So imagine when Dajjal comes, situation is going to be far worse, and at that time everybody's going to be saying, yes, saving our life is compulsory, and then they will start quoting verse of the Quran, وَقَلْبُهُ مُطْمَئِنٌ بِالْإِيمَانِ, that when someone's life is in danger, they are put under the gun, under the sword, then they're allowed to say that they are disbelievers or utter words of kufr, just to save their lives. So yes, Muslims are going to use these excuses and evidences and try to justify it. And then after saying that, just by saying I'm not a Muslim is not enough. You're going to have to join his army. You're going to have to join his party, live with them, etc. What of your iman would be left? Initially, you might have just said, yes, I am not a Muslim, or something along those lines, just to save your life. But later on, you're going to end up compromising anything. You won't be able to pray, you won't be able to do anything, you're going to have to worship him or something along those lines. Nothing of your deen will be left. Same thing right now, we're using these excuses. We close the masajid, months go past, months go past, years go past, maybe, Allah forbid. then it's already difficult enough as it is to keep our youth connected to the masajid, connected to deen, connected to the ulama. Can you imagine what's going to be the situation after all this is over? And we should think. I mean, of course, the ulama, they were hesitating so much before giving the fatwa, with all due respect, and it was very difficult decision for them, etc. And eventually, like they said, they never had a choice. Government will pass the rule, etc. But other people, they just don't seem to be bothered. Before the government even suggested the closure of masjid, etc., we've got the kings like King Salman, Muhammad ibn Salman, and other Muslim rulers. They jumped to this opportunity of closing the masajid without any remorse, without any regret whatsoever. They're still getting on with their lives, enjoying their lives. It doesn't bother them. Whereas Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَمَنْ أَظْلَمُ مِمَّنْ مَنَعَ مَسَاجِدَ اللَّهِ أَنْ يُذْكَرَ فِيهَا اسْمُهُ وَسَعَى فِي خَرَابِهَا أُولَٰئِكَ مَا كَانَ لهم أن يدخلوها إلا خائفين لهم في الدنيا خزي ولهم في الآخرة عذاب عظيم ومن أظلم ممن منع مساجد. Who could be more unjust, more oppressive than those who prevent from the houses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And yudhkara fiha ismuhu, prevent people from Allah's name being remembered in the houses of Allah. وَسَعَى فِي خَرَابِهَا, and they work towards ruining the masajid, etc. Yes, some people, they just don't have any regret whatsoever. So it's quite a sad situation, and especially, like I said, I'm mostly concerned about the state of the ummah in the Muslim countries. Here in the West, Alhamdulillah, the Nasara, the Christians, they tend to have this kind of sympathy, consideration towards the poor, towards the weak, towards the needy, etc. And it is because of that, the Western world are successful, and they're very advanced in all aspects. And we see our Muslim countries, we're suffering in every aspect. Is one of the biggest reasons is because we're probably the worst and the harshest and the nastiest towards our own people, the nastiest towards our poor, our weak, and our needy. Whereas the Christians, they are known for having sympathy, compassion towards the disabled, towards the unwell, the poor, and the weak, etc. And because of this reason, they are successful, and so long as they have that, they will carry on having success. And until us Muslims, we turn back to our true the characteristics of loving the poor, supporting the weak, supporting the oppressed, and being generous, compassionate, we will never ever be successful and prosperous in this world. So in this country, alhamdulillah, they are supporting us, Muslims or non-Muslims, whatever. If you haven't got a job, you've got housing benefit, you've got income support, universal credit, etc. Small businesses, they're getting this exemption and support, etc. Whereas Muslim countries, they're following the Western countries, etc., in closing the masajid down, and it's like war going on. It's just shocking and disturbing how the police in Muslim countries going around battering, beating people up. It's like there's a war between the coronavirus and the general public, and the government and the police is on the side of coronavirus, and they're like on war against the general public, beating them up, not caring about anything. It's chaotic in some countries, India, in Bangladesh, some countries in Africa, Tanzania or Kenya or something like that. These videos going around. It's really sad, and obviously the government is not going to care about how these Muslims, how these poor people are surviving, etc. Whereas really in poor countries like Bangladesh, so many, probably much more people are dying of poverty, of illnesses, just crime and road accidents and all that stuff. Yet the government doesn't take any action whatsoever. It doesn't even care about how many people are dying due to malnutrition and unclean water, etc. No action. There was riots going on about having some traffic control because of the amount of people dying in road accidents, yet the government doesn't take any action. Instead, it sends the police army to beating up young innocent school children. This is the kind of attitude our Muslim countries have. And lastly, I'll just conclude about some of the conspiracy theories that are going around. I mean, there's so many conspiracy theories. Americans are blaming China, etc., and China is blaming America for these kind of for spreading these viruses, etc. Although I can't take any sides, etc., and I don't really make any judgments about this, but at the same time, me personally, I don't rule it out. Nothing is impossible, and these things are possible. And like you see all these movies and things like that as well, and they don't just make these movies out of the blue. There are some reality to it, sort of thing, like back in the days, the movies they probably made about UFOs and robots and things like that, futuristic films about robots and things like that, flying objects, some of the UFOs. It probably modern day fighter jets look much more advanced and fast than the UFOs and things like that they used to show in the movies back in the days. So they didn't make those movies just purely out of imagination. It's because they had these things predicted. They knew which path they're going towards, and that's how it's going to be, sort of thing. And to show what they're working towards, what's in the plan. Based on that, they're able to make these movies. So similarly, these kind of viruses being spread, etc., etc. There must have some reality to these things. And it's not surprising. I mean, just like how America dropped the nuclear bomb, atomic bomb on Hiroshima, killed millions of people. Until today, people are suffering and dying far more than what the coronavirus is doing, for example. So prior to that, say 300 years before that, mankind probably could not have ever imagined that there would be a time when a country would wipe out the entire nation like this. Not the entire nation, even for generations to come, they will make them suffer. Even probably the Mongolians couldn't even imagine doing such things like that. They would go take over a country once under control. They will let the country people live as normal, so long as they paid them the little tax and things like that. And many of them afterwards, integrated with those societies, became Muslims and intermarried, and they weren't as barbaric as well. Even they couldn't probably imagine that a time would come. You'd have people in suit and ties who are pretending to be the civilized people, would drop a bomb and wipe out entire nation, and for generations to come. They couldn't imagine it. So if governments, so-called civilized and compassionate people, could do such a thing, so what is so surprising and hard to believe about them doing these kind of spreading these viruses, etc.? And this is like the modern day warfare, etc., as they predict. And it's nothing new as well. I mean, I think it's very common. Lots of articles and documentaries and stuff that I've read myself about how they wiped out the Red Indians in America, how they wiped out the Aborigines, etc. It's viruses, smallpox and this and that. They spread in those countries, and obviously the Red Indians, they didn't have any medicine, etc. to tackle these viruses until the entire nation literally wiped out, and that's how they so easily a huge continent, they just took over so easily, and now they're living in so much luxury with all the resources of the world under their thumb. And that's how they're able to rule the rest of the world with all these natural resources from America and things like that. So it's nothing new. They have done it before. So what is so difficult about them doing it now? Yes, some would say, well, why would they do it when they are suffering themselves? But nobody's saying it's Donald Trump who's doing it. Or Boris Johnson who is planning these things. These are just, puppets, small puppets who are being controlled by the big guys. These are nothing. They're nothing. What are they going to do? Of course, they don't have a clue what's happening around the world. They're just here for a couple of years. They've been here only, last couple of years. They're going to, Allah knows how many months or years more they will stay in power. After that, they'll be gone. They haven't got a clue what's happening. It's not them. These are bigger guys. Whether you call it the Illuminati, or whether you call it the Freemasons, or whether you call it the Rothschild family or Rockefeller family, or whatever you want to call it, there's much bigger guys out there, and they're one family. They're one nation, whether it's the Ulaika Hizbullah, ala inna Hizballahi humul muflihun, Ulaika Hizbu Shaitan, ala inna Hizba Shaitani humul khasirun. That these are the party and the army of Shaitan. These are the Shaitan's army. They don't care what your background is, what country you're from. They're one family. They have close connection throughout the world. And they're the ones who are ruling the world. They're the ones. It's just, put it that way. It's just like when you see the movies where you got the elite companies, etc., causing viruses, and the whole world becoming like zombies or something along those lines. And they are living in high skyscrapers and just traveling with helicopters from one place to another place. They don't care. They're living up in the sky. So it's not affecting them at all. So it's not impossible. What I'm saying is, yes, I'm not saying this is the case, etc. here, but that's not something you can rule out. Likewise, of course, these viruses and plagues exist as well throughout history, right from the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, before his time, after his time. Sahabas have died. Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has spoken about viruses and plagues, etc. So obviously that exists as well. But just like with anything, with modern technology, they're able to control all sorts of things. So the genetics and human genes and all these things, they're able to control it, manipulate it. So them being able to manipulate and utilize and viruses, etc., is nothing impossible. So anyway, I will just conclude it here. Ultimately, we pray Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preserves our iman at the times of fitna such as this, more worse fitna to come, and we should be prepared. As we know, the hadith, the time would come holding onto your iman and be like holding onto burning coal, etc. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala save us from these calamities, from these trials and tribulations. And ultimately, we should know that life and death is only in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, we should not be so frustrated and so scared and panicking and overreacting, etc. At the same time, we should not be suicidal. We should be responsible. We should be we should take necessary precaution, etc., without going way over the top and get into a panic mode and things like that. At the same time, we don't be totally reckless and careless and become suicidal. No, we just get on with our lives, be sensible and take the necessary precaution, and just believe firmly. It doesn't matter how much precaution and safety measures you may take. If it's meant to come to you, it will come to you. There's no way you can avoid it. This is from the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As Muslims, we don't need to look at rational, explanations and scientific explanations. We just know clearly, Prophet said, "At-ta'un adhabun yab'athuhu Allahu ala man yasha, wa innahu rahmatun lil mu'minin." That ta'un, these plagues, is a punishment Allah sends upon who He wishes. He chooses exactly who should be afflicted with this punishment. وَإِنَّهُ رَحْمَةٌ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ, and it is a mercy for the believers. So Allah chooses whom He wants to use this as a punishment for, and whom He wants to use this as a mercy for. So therefore, we cannot run away from the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If He wishes to trial us as a mercy to get our sins forgiven, to give us a death as shahada, we can't do anything about it. We should accept it and be grateful with the qadarullah. Likewise, if it's as a form of punishment for us for our sins and our shortcomings, etc., there's nothing we can do about it. So we should have that firm belief, get on with our lives, and most importantly, more than the loss of our life, the loss of our dunya wealth, we should be more concerned about the loss of our deen, the loss of the deen of our children, etc. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give the tawfiq to act on what we said. Wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillah rabbil alamin. Jazak.